So I think we'll get ready to start. We're getting nearly ready. I'll just get ready to start. If you have any questions, again, for any people who have just joined. So what I want to do is, we've all been bored. Well, I don't think we've been bored, that's the wrong way, with COVID-19. I'm not going to bore you with that. We are available, etc. We've got systems in place to deal with that. So what I want to do is a series of webinars over the next few weeks as we're all in lockdown and Netflix is getting a little bit boring. So I'm going to plan to do a series of webinars and different interesting things that I find interesting and I want to share with you guys, so you get to understanding what my thought processes are when I'm dealing with cases, what I'm thinking, and what my thought process is of managing some of these cases. Now, they're not all straightforward. Some of them are individual. A lot of my rehab programs are individual rehab programs. I don't have a standard form because I deal with you and the horse. So we're going to go through, start at the basics, start at the anatomy, and work our way through. So, super, we've got a fair number of people here already, and we'll get started. So, the take home to start with this here is that tendon ligaments can really take you out of, can be career ending for some horses. They really can stop a career and also prolong periods on the sidelines. If I'm totally honest, I'd rather deal with a joint issue. We can get you back up and going a lot quicker than a tendon ligament. So the treatment is often the cheapest part of dealing with this. For a lot of you guys, you've got your own horses, they're on adjustments, so it probably doesn't cost, but the time you're going to invest with that horse is going to be immense. So I don't take that as a small part, but as a result, I think the results for the rehab programs are directly proportional to your input. Now, for people that dealt with me already on these, I often like to keep in contact quite a lot to see how it's going. I don't give big plans and say, I'll see you in 6 months' time, because you do have to alter them depending on the horse and what's going on. So let's go with the anatomy. I'm going to basically, in this talk, concentrate on two particular areas for the sport horse. This is very much aimed more for the sport horse than the racehorse. Racehorses, this superficial digital flexor tendon is going to be a big problem. But for your performance horses, the suspensory ligament and the deep digital flexor, check ligament, and also the foot, the scary place that we don't like to talk about. So your anatomy, to get your basic anatomy, your cannon bone here, and so you've got your cannon bone here. You've got sesamoid bones. This is the fetlock joint. So we have the suspensory ligament here broken down into sort of probably 3 parts really for the sport horses. You've got, sorry, there's just pop-up messages coming. Sorry about that. So you've got 3 parts that we deal with. You've got the proximal suspensory, the mid-body, and then your branches down here attaching on the sesamoids, and you've got your distal sesamoidian ligaments, which we sometimes see problems, but it's mostly a racehorse problem. Deep digital flexor, you've obviously got the check ligament inserting on there, and I'll deal with those two together because I do feel they are interrelated, they connect. And then we've got a superficial digital flexor tendon in the back. So, a quick quiz. I'm just going to do a quick polling if you can, and I just want you to answer some questions. Basically, so what are the questions? Does an issue in any of these areas cause lameness? 100% of the time. So we've got, first question, does a superficial digital flexor tendon injury always cause lameness? Suspensory body injury is the second question. Don't be shy, you can't be right or wrong, I can't see your answers. And if you can answer them, have a go, because I think it's interesting we get to grips with what's going on here. Do these all cause lameness? Because often we get asked, you know, does this cause a lameness issue? So let's see how we're going. So 20% of you voted, we'll keep going. Okay, we're getting there. So, it's not changing. Does a superficial digital flexor tendon injury cause lameness all the time? No, it actually doesn't. And that's an interesting thing. When I did a study on the racehorses about 10 years ago over a 12-month period, I trotted up every horse that was presented for superficial digital flexor tendon injury. So there are obvious swellings and pain on palpation. Majority of them are actually lame on the other leg, believe it or not. So I do feel sometimes in the racehorse that's SDFT injury is an overloading injury. Suspensory body, no, it doesn't as well. It's mostly puffiness. When we see a suspensory body injury, especially in the forelimb, it's generally doesn't cause lameness. Suspensory branch, no. 82% of you said no. I'd agree with that there. It's rare unless it's really, really trashed. Check ligament. It can actually vary. It's an interesting one. So you've got 60% of you said yes, and 40% said no. It's actually 50-50 with what I've seen. So it is actually an interesting one to see that sometimes they'll cause lameness, sometimes they won't. Sometimes they're actually quite severe lameness for what you see clinically, but you've got a lot of damage on ultrasound. So thank you very much for that. That was good. So next we go on to what are we going to use for diagnosing these conditions? I talk tendons, ligaments. You interestingly ultrasound. Grab the ultrasound machine, Mark, have a look. This is a branch injury of superficial digital flexor tendon in the pastern region that was presented was quite obvious swelling. So next we've got X-rays. X-rays are really useful for proximal suspensory injuries. So you can see this line here. This is actually an avulsion fracture. On ultrasound as well, we could see the bone lifting off. And so that is something. Blocking some of them as well. Again, with the high suspensory behind and in the forelimb as well, sometimes the diagnostics can be a little bit, what's the best word to describe? Unexciting. And you don't see anything really obvious. But if they block to there, you do have to take that as a serious thing. Next we got your scintigraphy. So scintigraphy is very useful for insertional injuries of any of your tendons and ligaments. So this is a proximal suspensory. These are the knees up here. And yeah, you've got just there, an abnormal pattern. Okay, so someone's asked a question. I'll leave that to the end. So next, we've got the MRI. Now, MRI is a fabulous tool. This is a foot of a horse. As you can see, we're tracking through. We do see the bone. We see digital flexor tendon through here, and it's an interesting topic. You know, that we see. We see a lot of. We use the MRI. We send them off to Ballarat generally because they do them on standing, but it's really useful to assess structures inside the foot. So I had a question, and this is an interesting one. I had a question sent in by a viewer. The question was, is it possible for a horse to have a bilateral tendon injury with nothing showing up on an ultrasound scan? Now, that is an interesting question. Probably only got data on one horse. So I had one horse that was sent for an issue involving the suspensory ligament becoming stuck to the cannon bone due to a massive splint. And we sent the horse for an MRI. Now, on the other leg, because they were just out of interest comparing both sides, there was something seen. So on ultrasound, this is the ultrasound of the tendon. We're looking at the superficial digital flexor tendon here. It's quite a big horse. It was a big warm blood, and it has quite a big superficial digital flexor tendon. There's no black lesions or black holes, as we call it. When we look at this MRI, we're looking at this region. So this is cross-sectional. This is the cannon bone. You've got see this whitened area through here. This is technically a core lesion visible on an MRI. So I think it is possible the further I've gone on along in my career, the more you realize that not everything's perfect. So no diagnostic tool is 100%. There's always mismatches. This horse actually went on to compete and came back into work. And unfortunately, did a branch injury of its superficial digital flexor tendon at the opposite end of where we'd seen the problem on the MRI. So yes, it is possible, but you have to compare your diagnostic tools and see what you can utilize to find the answer. So when we're talking treatment for injuries, we've got a few things up our sleeves. So what have we got up our sleeves? We've got shockwave therapy. A lot of you would have seen that. That's the sine wave. Very useful tool. Platelet-rich plasma is also very useful. In the superficial digital flexor tendons, I've had very good results using PRP, short rest period, and then a controlled exercise program on a high-speed treadmill, to the extent that we got about 95, 96% horses back to 5 starts or more, when the industry average is sort of around probably 60% is the general accepted stuff. But it's also very useful for suspensory branch injuries. You're using the horse's own blood and you're injecting it back in. So that can be a very useful tool to use for certain conditions, depending on what we've got. You do need a bit more fiber disruption to put it in. I do not like injecting it into just a thickened, mildly disrupted fiber pattern, because I find these needles end up acting like blades and cutting it because you've nothing to really inject into. So trying to infiltrate it all around, the needle works like a knife, and a knife in the tendon is not a great thing. Stem cells, we don't really have that commercially available in Australia. You can get some labs to grow it. It's quite hard technically and a bit thing. This is a newer therapy, laser therapy I've added to the clinic, and I've been using it in a few cases, and I'm finding it quite useful. So the type of horse I'm using it on is insertional injuries, mild thickening of ligaments that you probably don't want to be shockwaving all the time, and you want to try and sort of keep that rehab going. Now, I have units that I can loan out to people to use on them, and they work quite well, and I've been quite impressed. And I probably jumped more onto the laser therapy after having something done on my own foot for an insertional injury, and I've had no pain since having it done. So really positive. And also the farriers. Farriers are really important for managing tendon and ligament injuries, especially the foot, but also other areas as well. So we're now going to talk about rehab. So in this here, I do want to ask questions. Sometimes people ask me during consults, is there something we've done that could have caused this? And I think we do have to start questioning what we're doing with horses and what we're saying. Your vet's often the best person to ask, because you guys are, for a lot of you, you've got 1 or 2 horses maybe, and you do not see the wide spectrum of what we're saying. So, you know, most vets have got the data on what they're saying. And there seems to be runs on things. You know, you see, excuse me, you'll see a rush of tendon injuries, or you'll see a rush of suspensory injuries. And we do see that. So I think that is linked to competition arenas and stuff like that there. So we do always have to question. I think in the sport horse industry, we're a little bit lacking in getting data together to try and see what's going on. So things to consider: why an injury happened, first of all. Okay. Okay, so your surfaces, I've talked about that again. Now, so there's all different types of surfaces. You've got your grass, you've got your, your rubber surface, your sand, your fiber sand, your normal sand, and everything in between. And I think fundamentally we have something to deal with as an industry at the minute. We've gone, people have listened to me, I've preached about this, sorry, I'll get on my soapbox. 10 years ago, we had a lot of foot problems in horses. We did. And we mostly had thoroughbreds in the population. The warm blood wasn't the predominant horse in the performance horse market. Now, 10 years later, it's warm blood. It's rare to see a thoroughbred almost. So and in that time frame, we've gone from firmer arenas, maybe sand arenas on a road base that are generally quite firm. And we swung across to this synthetic fiber mix generally, which is seen. And I think there's nothing wrong with this synthetic fiber mix. I actually think it's the deepness that we prepare them. And I think some of those surfaces really need a lot of water. And I think that's maybe underestimated when they're installed, how much water they need and management they need to keep them quite firm. And they need to be quite firm. Anything that's too deep does increase our chances of tendon and ligament injury. Also the workload, how much work are we doing? So someone asked a question regarding surfaces and what their thoughts were on it before this webinar. And I think workload is also equally important. So seeing a lot of dressage horses, it's repetitive strain injury, round and round in circles, 60 by 20 arena. I think getting them out of the arena will really improve and reduce our injury rate, which will be beneficial for the horses. Also age. Now, why do I say age is important? Well, here's a fact. Tendons and ligaments reach maturity at 18 months of age in your horse. From then on in, it's downhill. It's old age. So even by the time they get 8, 9, they're starting to show old age changes in those tendons and fibers. I, at pre-purchase, have started recommending we do ultrasound the legs. And the reason for that is to get a baseline, what they look like today, because often you come back, you might get a bit of inflammation, you scan it, doesn't have a big hole in it, but is it thicker, is it big, what's it done? And it's similar, everyone can get their head around X-rays being, or we get a baseline. And we've got something to compare to with feet X-rays or when you purchase the horse and you track them through. I think ultrasound now, we need to consider actually managing, assessing those horses and getting a baseline, what's normal, what's abnormal for that horse. So, has it got a thickened medial suspensory branch or has it got a thickened check ligament? What's it like now? It's not a problem, but we keep an eye on it. Foot conformation, no foot, no horse. That's very important. Like I don't need to harp on about that. And also previous injuries. Has the horse previously had an injury? And I think that's something that probably needs to come through a little bit on horses that are sold. I think disclosure of previous injuries would be beneficial to help design the workload management for those horses. And as people get a little bit more understanding that horses have had a previous injury, how do we manage them? How do we prevent it happening again? What can we do to help that horse? So, principles of rehab. These are some of the guiding principles I use, and it's something that every vet is different. And I think knowing other vets in the area and in the state, I think I probably am a little bit more forward in the fact that I get horses moving quite quickly. I fundamentally believe a horse has to move. It's designed to move. You cannot stop it moving and you have to keep it moving. Okay, so I think they have to move. They have to move, and that is something that I'm really big on. So just for an example here, this is a horse that had a tendon injury, okay? This is around January time. Now, this was a very thickened tendon. A normal cross-section area of a superficial digital flexor tendon is about 1.35, 1.2, 1.3 if it's a big tendon, maybe 1.4 if it's a really big tendon, normal tendon. This is 1.71, it had a big lesion. Now this horse was started in work and this scan is 6 weeks later and it has decreased in size. Now, other managements of the horse, how strict am I? Some people have asked me already via email, how do you manage these horses? A happy horse is a healthy horse. So I do like them moving. I like to get them out into yards. I don't keep them boxed for extended periods of time. Just don't like it. I don't think it's good for a horse. We're very lucky in Australia. We've got a lot of land and we can use it. And I like getting them out and getting them movement. Movement is king because some horses are actually quieter like we worry when we talk about rehabbing, we don't want to lunge in circles. Well, why do we lock them in boxes and they walk around a 10 by 10, a 3 meter by 3 meter box and they go round and round and round in circles? If I asked you to lunge a horse like that, you'd think I was an idiot. So I do struggle with why we lock them in boxes all the time. So that is something there. Body weight, sorry. That is really important. I know it's really hard when a horse is injured and not in work. We really have to restrict the diet. And I know there's this fear of ulcers and gastric ulcers, and you know, we got to keep feeding, them. But all this extra weight on the limbs is really negative on the horse. And I think we have to be very careful. We've got an issue with this here, and we have to be aware when we're managing these horses. So let me just have a quick look at the questions. So I'll answer this one here. Do you suggest supplementing or treating horses throughout their career for preventive measures of injuries, not just horses in old age? Yes, I do, but I'm also aware that there's a limit to the money we can spend, and I'm very realistic about that. I work within everyone's means, and I think some of the best things you can do for young horses is varying their workload and keeping them healthy and good that way. And you know, your shoeing and stuff like that. So making sure you get those feet sorted as a young horse. It's so much easier to fix a 4-year-old than it is to fix a 10-year-old. I can tell you that now. 10-year-old, you're just managing it. So hope that answers the question. So designing a rehab plan. Every rehab plan I write is different for every horse. And why is that? Because you guys you've got different facilities, your availability of time, also the nature of the horse. What's the horse like to deal with? You know, is it the type of horse that you can just jump on and ride, or is it one that's so hot that you've got to lunge it for 2 weeks before we can even get on it? So that horse there, the hot horse, has to be managed differently to the quiet horse. And that's also why I like to get movement. I think in a lot of performance horses, I like to get you guys on board quickly to do the walking. And the reason for that is, if you can keep we all know, if you can keep a performance horse in a routine, even if you're changing that routine down to walking, and they're used to having a saddle on their back and they're used to having you on the back and walking, when I ask for more, it's so much easier just to step it up. I'm not having to worry about this horse is going to be really hot. And so it's easier riding, and it's also more fun. Let's be honest, we have horses to ride. It's easier for you guys to do that. And also the aim of the horse when I'm rehabbing a horse. Now, getting a horse that's previously been a Grand Prix dressage horse, and that's where aim is, that's so much more involved, because all those different movements have got to be added in so that horse, I don't just sign off on the same horse. Then we look at alternative exercises. Now, this is a big area, and I do get asked about a lot. What alternative methods have we got? We've got water treadmills, we've got water walkers, we've got high-speed treadmills. So I like them all. They all have a place, but I don't think they replace riding your horse, basically, to be honest. I don't think I would say, you know, so I think they're balanced depending on what you got available. So an example is, let's use a couple of examples here to show where I would instigate alternative exercise. So you're limited for time is one. So sending the horse off to a water treadmill or a water walker to do that early work, it's not a bad thing. If we can get it done and we can get the work done and we can exercise the horse, that will help. But the horse is still moving on the leg. It's not floating. It's not swimming. You know, swimming's not really available for the performance horses, and most performance horses never swum before. 17-hand warm blood teaching them to swim is not the funnest game in the world. Have been involved in it. It's not fun. The high-speed treadmills, really useful. For the eventers out there, if you're an eventer, find yourself a treadmill. Be really nice to the people. Drop them a bottle of wine, or buy them a box from Prancing Horse Estate, who are supporting us this evening, because they're really, really useful. Really, really useful. If you can do your gallop work on the treadmill, that will decrease the speed of what you the amount of work you put on. So you can put them on a treadmill, you can put them on an angle, you put the weight on behind, you get it off the front leg. If you're coming back from a tendon injury, that's fabulous to do that there. So all got their place. It depends what you're sort of aiming for, but I don't get too obsessed by them, to be honest. So just checking the questions here. So, question here. Do you have a parameter for when you would start water treadmill exercise for a soft tissue injury? Current suggestions from Camden Uni is 35 minutes dry walking. Do you agree? Yes. No, probably not. I don't. I think they're a useful tool. I don't love them I don't. I like them for an adjunct training exercise. So if I can get 3 days, 4 days a week ridden exercise, and I get 2 days on a water treadmill, then I'm quite happy with that. I like to balance it, really, to be honest. So, and I think they're good cross training. They are a good cross training modality if I'm trying to decrease the miles on a horse's leg and get them working, but they do really have to work hard. And I'm not convinced they're really working hard. So, I think it's a good break up and to get an extra day's training into horse, but I still think we need to work them. So, okay. Another question, from a lower leg injury perspective, if you had to choose between overstudying or understudying on cross country, what is more risky, more likely to cause injury? I think you need to go under. I think we're too big to overstud. Horses are very good at keeping their balance, unless you're going to be sort of galloping at very tight turns and twisty tracks. I think understudying is better. What I don't like, and I will be honest, is I see it all the time at venues, is horses standing in studs all day. Take them out. Take them out. And not that I've ever danced around in high heels, but all reports when you see women at events, they're standing in high heels all day, they get sore, and you're doing that to a horse. Why would you wedge a horse up? You know, you see some big block studs, even a centimetre. Why would you stand a horse all day? Centimeters. So I hope that answers the question. Is it worse for a horse to turn in or out at the knee in respect to tendon injuries? I don't think there's an answer there. I don't really think we've got an answer there. Turning in, ideally a horse should slightly turn out. I think the ideal conformation, if you're aiming for, is straight through the cannon bones, which we rarely have. Most of them are offset. So by that, I mean the cannon bones set out to the outside, come down. I don't love them turning in. I prefer them slight turn out. I think that's a more natural gait as they gallop and they go fast. I think it's slight turn out's better. So hope that answers the question. Okay, let's keep going. So, answered a few questions there. There is a couple of other questions I will answer, but they're more difficult. Okay, so question. So, walking in paddock for rehab when hock rebuild is 20 minutes stretching long and low, good to do. Yeah, I think so. Walking around and getting movement is very good and gets those horses under control and manages them. And generally, a little bit of exercise keeps them a bit more sensible in the paddock. Next question. A horse that has done both hind suspensory ligaments 18 months ago, rehab for 6 months, then redid one of them again with a 12 months rest. How would you start a rehab program? With that horse there, I'd be really looking at shoeing, to be honest. And there is changes you can do to the shoes, which I'll discuss in a minute, to help those horses in the hind legs, especially. Someone's mentioned they've got a small tendon lesion. Would you continue walking or turn out in paddock? It's hard to know, really, unless you know the extent of the lesion, to be honest, before you work out what's the best way to go. If it's a severe lesion, I sometimes, even with tendon injuries, will give them a break before I start for superficial digital flectors. I find they do better that way. Okay, let's keep going.